Okay, so let me ask you a quick question to kick things off. Do you think science, strict logic, and a highly detailed 16-page double-sided questionnaire can actually solve the incredibly messy, unpredictable problem of finding true love? I mean, it sounds a little crazy, right? But believe it or not, that is the exact premise of the wildly popular novel we're unpacking in today's explainer.
We're framing our entire look at this book around that one central question. We're going to dive into a brilliant, character-driven story about a guy who decides he can completely optimize romance. And, as you might guess, we get to see what happens when that perfectly optimized plan crashes headfirst into the chaotic reality of human connection. It is an opposites-attract story like absolutely no other. Section 1. The Logical Professor's Dilemma.
So, meet Don Tillman. Don is a 39-year-old Australian genetics professor. He's fit, he's financially secure, he's undeniably brilliant, and his entire existence is governed by extreme logic and efficiency. For example, he literally operates on what he calls a standardized meal system. It's a fixed weekly rotation, like Tuesday's always lobster salad, just to minimize cognitive load. Every single minute of his day is scheduled. But here's the catch. While his brain is a well-oiled machine for science, he struggles immensely to naturally interpret social norms. His highly literal thinking often leaves him, well, totally out of sync with the world around him.
And I love this point because it perfectly illustrates how the author, Graeme Simsion, approached creating Don's character. Rather than pulling from, dry clinical descriptions of neurodivergence, Simsion actually based Don on real people he knew and loved in the fields of science and IT. The novel never formally gives Don a clinical label. Instead, it just empathetically celebrates his really unique worldview. It isn't a case study. It's a deeply human story.
Moving right along to Section 2, The Wife Project.
So, Don decides it's time to apply his logical worldview to romance. After a long history of spectacular dating disasters, including the rather infamous apricot ice cream disaster, he initiates the Wife Project. And his solution? Highly methodical for sure. First, identify the inefficiencies in traditional dating. Second, design a rigorous 16-page double-sided survey. And third, instantly filter out anyone who doesn't fit his exact criteria. Literally, if you smoke, drink, have a BMI over 26, or arrive even slightly late, you are instantly disqualified. He is hunting for mathematical literacy and perfect punctuality.
But as we all know, the best-laid plans rarely survive contact with the real world, do they? Which brings us to the real inciting incident of our story. What on earth happens when a man who has planned out literally every second of his existence meets a woman who defies every single rule on his carefully crafted 16-page questionnaire?
Section 3. Enter Rosie and Chaos.
Enter Rosie Jarman. Now, she's actually introduced to Don as a practical joke by his somewhat philandering colleague, Jean. And Rosie? She represents the ultimate agent of chaos in Don's life. Think about it. On one hand, we have the rigid criteria of the Wife Project, punctual, non-smoker, teetotaler. On the other hand, we have Rosie. She shows up late, she smokes, she works as a bartender while studying for her psychology PhD, and she is fiery, emotional, and totally spontaneous. Mathematically speaking, she is the worst possible candidate for the Wife Project.
Section 4. The Father Project.
So naturally, Don instantly disqualifies Rosie as a romantic prospect. Done deal. But instead of just banishing her from his life, he gets totally fascinated by a personal quest she's on. You see, Rosie's mother passed away, leaving behind a massive secret. Rosie is searching for her biological father, and she only knows that he attended a graduation party for her mother's medical cohort years ago. She desperately needs an expert in genetics to figure it out, and Don decides that helping her is, actually, a perfectly rational use of his time.
Now, Don applies his intense, laser-like focus to eliminating suspects one by one. But his methods are, well, they're anything but conventional. He goes to incredible, secretive lengths to acquire DNA samples from these men. We're talking subterfuge, sneaking around, and secretly running the samples through his university laboratory. He is literally putting his prestigious career completely on the line just to help Rosie. At one point, they even start to suspect Don's own best friend, Jean, who was actually at the party.
Section 5. Love versus logic.
Because of this investigation, Don and Rosie are forced to spend a massive amount of time together. And the friction between their clashing personalities, that is where the heart and humor of this story truly shine. The comedy stems warmly from Don's very literal interpretations of the world.
For example, he weighs a waterproof Gore-Tex windbreaker to a highly exclusive fine dining restaurant, genuinely believing it fulfills their strict jacket requirement for men. When the restaurant staff disagrees, Don actually uses his Aikido training to neutralize the bouncers. Or there's a time he brings a smelly, dead flounder into a classroom to literally illustrate evolution to a student. But here's the thing. The comedy never pities Don. Rather, we get to see the sheer absurdity of our own social conventions through his highly logical eyes.
While Don might miss certain social cues, he very often sees truths that neurotypical people have gone totally blind to. What we're really seeing here is what's known as the double empathy problem. It's not just Don failing to understand the world, it's the world failing to understand Don's completely sound, albeit unconventional logic. It's two entirely different worldviews trying desperately to connect. To truly test this connection, the Father Project eventually requires them to track down two final suspects, and this forces Don completely out of his safe, comfortable routine in Australia and into a highly spontaneous trip to New York City with Rosie. So it brings up the ultimate test: can his strict logic survive the absolute chaos of New York?
Section 6. Transformation and Growth.
This trip to New York is basically a catalyst. It shows just how deeply these two opposites are impacting one another. While in New York, Rosie practically forces Don to throw away his rigid itineraries. And guess what? He discovers he can actually enjoy spontaneity. He likes breaking his own rules. Conversely, Don's unwavering, unquestioning loyalty provides Rosie with the exact emotional anchor she needs to confront her deep-seated family issues, particularly her difficult relationship with her stepfather, Phil. Together, they're both figuring out the messy, beautiful reality of embracing imperfection.
Which brings us to our final section: embracing life's uncertainties.
As Don starts to realize that his own gut instincts are actually starting to override his pure reason, the novel reveals its true core message about embracing life's uncertainties. And man, did that message strike a massive chord with the public. Just look at this number for a second: 6 million. That is how many copies this story has sold globally. To put that into perspective, it's been translated into over 40 different languages. What started as an unpublished manuscript just caught fire and became an absolute international phenomenon.
So why did it blow up like that? Well, the author actually drew a lot of inspiration from classic 1930s and 40s screwball comedies. Think movies like His Girl Friday or Bringing Up Baby. It blends that rapid-fire situational comedy with an incredible amount of heart. It gives us a wholly unique narrator in Don, and honestly, most importantly, it champions the idea of accepting people exactly as they are rather than constantly trying to fix or change them. People fell in love with it so much that it spawned two beloved sequels, The Rosie Effect and The Rosie Result, wrapping up the whole Don Tillman trilogy.
So as we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with this thought. Don spends so much of his time trying to scientifically engineer the perfect life partner. But what if the greatest, most fulfilling parts of your life simply can't be planned? What if true connection only really happens when you are finally willing to embrace uncertainty, accept imperfection, and just throw away the questionnaire? Thanks so much for exploring this fantastic story with me today.